and welcome to this question and answer session brought to you exclusively on Suza TV. You're going to be with me, Munir Mustafa, as we continue to answer questions which are brought in biology. We're still continuing with the Form 3 syllabus, and today we'll also be answering questions brought on the Form 3 syllabus. So without wasting any further time, let's start with the questions. Our first question requires us to define the following terms. We have stimulus, receptor, neuron, and reflex action. So we're told here straightforwardly to define what are these terms, or what do these terms mean. While defining, there are two things you should know. First of all, while defining, you have to write the meaning of the term. Second of all, in defining, you have to write what do you understand about the term, even though it's for a short while or a short paragraph. But defining requires a person to show how do you understand on the word, or how do you understand on that term. So for instance, we have the stimulus. We know what a stimulus is, but the stimulus is nothing more but the change in an external or internal environment, that is inside or outside the body. So that is what a stimulus is. So a stimulus is any change which occurs either inside the body or outside the body. That is what a stimulus is. We have a receptor. A receptor is also nothing but a cell that can sense something about its environment. That is, a receptor is any cell which can sense the change in environment. That is, it can sense a stimulus. So we have receptor cells. In the body, there are many receptor cells which are the pain receptors, we have the heat receptors, pressure receptors, and all of these receptors inside the body have the singular job of detecting the changes or detecting stimuli which occur to the body. We have a neuron. What is a neuron? We all know that a neuron is nothing but a special type of cell which is highly sensitive or responsive to stimuli. So a neuron is nothing but a special type of cell which is very sensitive to any slight change in stimulus. So if there is a change, or if a stimulus occurs to the body, the neuron is very sensitive to it. So the neuron is a special cell which is very sensitive to the changes of the environment. That is, it is very sensitive to stimuli. And we have a reflex action. A reflex action is nothing but the rapid automatic response to a stimulus. So there are some types of reactions in which they are rapid and automatic. That is, they do not require any sort of teaching. So these reactions come naturally and they depend on the action. For instance, when a person pricks their finger with a pin, or when a person burns their hand, the main instinct is to reflex. The main reflex action is to remove the hand quickly from the heat source. So that is what a reflex action is. That's an example of a reflex action. Our second question tells us to draw a reflex arc and show what happens in the reflex arc. So this question has two parts. The first part, you have to draw a reflex arc, and the second part is to show what happens in the reflex arc. So you can show what happens first, like this, or you can draw first and then show what happens. So in showing what happens in a reflex arc, you can just show it by saying, first of all, a stimulus is sensed by a sensory receptor in the skin. So first of all, the term sensory receptor should be in the word. So first of all, the sensory receptor senses the stimulus. Then the impulse is passed through the sensory neuron in the spinal nerve of the part involved, be it the hand or the leg, but the impulse should pass through the sensory neuron of the nerve in the spinal nerve of the part. Then the impulse passes straight to the spinal nerve, which is very straightforward. It then moves through the cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. It then passes through the cell body of a relay neuron. It then passes through the motor neuron where the impulse reaches the motor nerve, ending where a correct response is performed. So we can see that in answering this question, we have shown what happens in the reflex arc, but we have not seen what the reflex arc is. So here we can see we have the sensory receptor, number 1. We have the sensory neuron, number 2, which we were talking about. We have the synapse or the dorsal root ganglion. We have the interneuron, or we can call it the relay neuron. Also, we have the motor neuron and the effector, or that is the effector neuron. So we can see that the sequence of this has occurred just like how we mentioned it before. So in drawing a reflex action, you can draw something like this, and then you can label it just like this. So you can use it like this. So here we have seen what the reflex arcs looks like. We have the receptor, we have the sensory neuron, we have the synapse or the dorsal root ganglion. We can see the interneuron, that is the relay neuron. We can see the motor neuron and the effector. So here we can see how the spinal or the impulse moves as seen by the red arrows and the blue arrows. The red arrow shows the impulse through the sensory neuron up to the synapse, that is the dorsal root ganglion in the spinal cord, and the black or blue arrows show the impulse which move towards the effector. So answering a question like this, you can answer it just like this. Moving ahead to the third question, we're asked to explain how we see using the eyes. So a question like this shows or requires a person to explain just what happens to the eyes when a person sees. So the effect of seeing or the action of seeing, what occurs during the action of seeing. So you can explain it by using a paragraph method just like this. Light rays from an object travel through the cornea. These terms should also be known: the cornea, aqueous humor, lens, and vitreous humor. In the process, they are bent or refracted and finally fall onto the retina to form an image. When light strikes the photoreceptors, impulses are created in the sensory nerve fibers, which join to form the optic nerve. The impulses are transmitted to the brain through the optic nerve, where they are interpreted, enabling a person to see. So first of all, we can see that light rays from the object travel to various parts in the eye. That is, there's the cornea, the aqueous humor, the lens, and the vitreous humor. So light passes through all of those parts in the eye. After that, they are bent or they are refracted, in which they fall onto the retina and form the image. but the image formed on the retina is upside down, or a real image. In physics form 3, when you learn about mirrors, you can learn about real images and virtual images, in which a real image is an image which is upside down, which is projected upside down, while a virtual image is an image which is projected the same way as you see yourself, or right side up. So when they finally fall on the retina, the photoreceptors inside the retina create impulses which move on to the sensory nerve fibers, creating the optic nerve. So the optic nerve is made up of many sensory nerve fibers. So in the optic nerve, the impulses, after being transmitted through the optic nerve, which move on to the brain. In the brain, the image is then interpreted and it is put on the right side. Instead of upside down, it's put into the normal order. So once this happens, then a person is said to see. So all of these processes are important when a person needs to see. Moving on to our fourth question, in which we are required to show the reasons why many youth take drugs. This is a common sense question. That a question being asked is, why do the youth, for instance in Zanzibar, take drugs? Drugs nowadays is a problem, is a major problem, in which we can see many young people sitting with no work to do, with nothing to do but just taking drugs. So the main question here asked is, why do they take drugs? Is there any real reason behind taking drugs? So in answering a question like this, you can answer it using what your mind tells you. But you can answer it like this, and the answers can be mentioned like this. They are, first of all, they are curious. That is, many youth or adolescent people are in a period where they're curious to know, what happens if you take drugs? What happens if I start smoking bang? What happens if I start drinking alcohol? What happens if I start using heroin or cocaine? What would happen? So a youth or a young person mostly is curious to what occurs when they use it. For instance, many people hear that using marijuana stimulates the senses but also gives you hallucinations. So many people would want to know, what happens, or how do these hallucinations occur? So they begin to take drugs to see, or to experiment on, what would happen if they would take drugs. Another reason is that they believe drugs will make them exciting. So some people think that they would make them look better in front of the eyes of people by taking drugs. For instance, many youths see in movies that the main character is drinking. After drinking, he gets into a fight. He looks very good in the TV. Also, we can smoking. They can see them smoking, consuming alcohol, or using other drugs such as cocaine and heroin. But they see that the main character, or most people, are seen to be looked upon or to be feared, respected when they use drugs. So they think that making or using drugs can make them be feared, or can make them be respected among their friends or among other people in the society. Also, they believe that drugs will improve their intelligence. There are some people who think that using drugs can improve their intelligence, or can improve their thinking capacity and answering capacity. As you all know, there are some people who say that smoking marijuana can increase the brain capacity, so that it can work more or it can work better. So many youth in examination classes such as Form 4, Form 2, even Form 6 or others in universities also use the same thing, also think that by taking drugs they can actually make their minds to concentrate more on studying. So they start taking drugs by thinking that it would help them gain more intelligence. Another one is that they don't want to go against peers. So most of them take drugs because of peer pressure. They see their closest friends taking drugs. They see the people around them taking drugs, be it their parents, their cousins, their friends, people close to them taking drugs, and they do not want to lose their friends. So in order to keep their friendship, they also start to use drugs. So they start taking drugs, start using drugs due to the fact that they cannot refuse their peers. So when their peers tell them to take drugs, they agree to them. Just because, first of all, people like these have a low self-esteem, and also they are afraid that once their friendship ends due to the fact that they do not want to take drugs, they would be very lonely. So through that fear, they see or they think that by not refusing the peers on taking drugs, they would keep their friendship, they would keep their social status. Also, another one is that they want to escape from the reality of the world and pressures of life. So some of them try to escape or say that they are escaping from the reality of the world and pressures of life by taking drugs. For instance, someone has lost his job, has a hard time with the family, he has lost his best friend, he has lost his children, he has lost everything. So he thinks the only way to escape from reality, to escape from the pain of loss, or to escape from the hardships of life is through taking drugs. By taking hallucination drugs, he can find himself in somewhere else where he thinks that he has escaped from reality, he has escaped from everywhere. So by taking drugs, they aim to escape from reality, they aim to escape from the hardships of life. So many people take drugs due to that reason. Moving on to the fifth question, we are required to differentiate between nervous and hormonal coordination. In the body, there are two types of coordination. There's the nervous coordination and there's the hormonal coordination. So also, both of them are very important in the body and both of them function very well inside the body. But they are two different types of coordination. So what are the differences? You can answer them in a system just like this. Like drawing a table and showing in each column one type of coordination. For instance, we have nervous coordination in one column and hormonal coordination on the other column. So first we have, so the first difference between them is that the nervous coordination has a quick and immediate response to stimulus, while the hormonal coordination has a slow and long response process. So the nervous coordination, if anything or if a stimulus occurs in the nervous coordination, there's a quick response as the impulse travels very fast to the brain and an action is initiated quickly. While in the hormonal coordination, it travels very slowly towards the bodies as it does not use any quick methods. The nervous coordination involves special cells, that is the neurons, while the hormonal coordination does not involve special cells. So in nervous coordination, there are the neurons, they're the special cells which are used to transfer information from one place to another. while in hormonal coordination, there are no neurons, so there are no special cells to transfer or to convey messages from one place to the other. In the nervous coordination does not need blood for conduction of nerve impulses. So in nervous coordination, blood is not needed for the conduction of nerve impulses, as nerve impulses are conducted through neurons. As nerve impulses are conducted through the neurons, there is no need for blood to be used. So, but in the hormonal coordination, blood for transportation of hormones to different parts of the body is needed. So the main transport medium for hormones is blood. So the hormones pass from one part of the body through the bloodstream to the other part of the body. The transmission is of an electrical nature. As we know, impulses in the neurons are of electrical nature, as they can be measured in microvolts. So we all know in millivolts. So we can see that electricity is produced, or electrical nature. Electricity is used in the transition of nerve impulses. While the transmission in hormonal coordination is of chemical nature. That is, it needs chemicals that are the hormones. So any information in the hormonal coordination is transported by the means of hormones, which are chemicals throughout the body. And what is a nervous coordination? A nervous coordination is the type of coordination which involves neurons to react to a certain stimulus. So a certain stimulus requires a nervous, or the neurons are used to react. So in nervous coordination, neurons are needed, or neurons are the ones which are used to react to the certain stimulus. While in hormonal coordination is the coordination which uses hormones to react to a certain stimulus. So there are some certain stimuli which occur which need hormones to be reacted. For instance, in nervous coordination, there is a quick response. For instance, if a person burns his hand, the nerves or the neurons pass the information quickly to the brain, and which a message is sent out for the hand to be removed. But for instance, while fighting a person, while during fighting or during of intense excitation, adrenaline is produced. The adrenaline produced moves on to the heart, which increases the heartbeat, increases the metabolic rate, in which it increases especially the whole body functions. So hormonal coordination needs hormones, or uses hormones to transfer information from one part of the body to the other. This concludes our question and answer session for today. Join us next time as we continue to look on questions in biology which are based on the Form 3 syllabus. You are with me, Munir Mustafa, through it all, and we tell you thank you and have a nice day. Join us next time.